This is ridiculous.
Who wrote that in a notebook? Child.
I don't know. How did child do something like that?
I'm a real person.
That sounds so bad, though. You do make me look
First
it
off,
up.
Alrighty, we're going to start off by handing back your midterms, going over them, answering any questions you may have about them, and then we'll press with World War II in Europe and North Africa, not in that particular order. But first, I'm always up for a little public embarrassment, good public embarrassment. So Cadet Fabris, 31 out of 30. That's your slow clap it. Slower. There we go. So 30 out of 30. Okay, and those are the most honorable mentions. The rest of these are in no particular order, but everybody did very well. Average was just over 90%, so pretty good compared to probably some of your engineering classes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Langy.
Legend in airfare. Not legend of
Should have
airfare.
taken one spot.
Legend in airfare.
Lewis.
my head and
Oh, sorry. We have another exceptional performer, Mr. Hathaway, 31 and a half. Oh. Outdoing all the cadets. Okay, Kennedy. Paul.
Last year. I don't know if I said it like this, but
with an extra L.
Okay, so going over the exam. Basic definitions, everybody did very, very well on, as well as doctrine, principles of war, tenets, aerospace power, all that good stuff. Any questions? First 2 pages. Okay. Skepticism, number 10, with the Army's initial reaction to the Wright brothers. Everybody got definition for strategic bombing correctly. But number 12, strategic bombing in World War I. Remember that was limited in scope and intensity. So it wasn't really until World War II where we really embraced it. The interwar years, we kind of developed all the war plans, the doctrine, everything like that. Primarily in World War I, it was close air support, ground support, support to ground commanders. Okay, Julia Dohe, those are all straightforward. 16. Remember, in the years after World War I, kind of experienced a period of isolation as the military budgets really decreased. So C was not correct. 18, a few people got the legislation mixed up. The Air Service, remember, that didn't get placed under General Headquarters Air Force until the mid-1930s. So the first 3 were true there. Okay, Air Corps Tactical School, I think everybody did pretty well on. Okay. Yep, I think everybody did pretty well on the rest of the questions. Any questions for me? The extra credits, the RAF commander, you got it. Oh, yes.
Was 18D?
18 was D.
Okay.
Who got first extra credit right? Okay, what was it? Okay. And the second one? There was like one person.
Luke.
Okay, 2 of you. Frank Luke Jr. Remember the Arizona Balloon Buster? Okay, and a lot of you got the last one or part of the last one right. Originally at Langley Field, Virginia, then 1931 moved to Maxwell Field. I accepted Air Force Base as well. I didn't just take the state. Sorry. I can be picky on extra credits. Any other questions? Okay, if you could pass them forward.
Burn class. So email route. Otherwise, I can email. But just read the email bounce on.
All right, but on to new topics. Not necessarily bigger and better. Certainly bigger, because we're going to be talking World War II. Okay, so we talked about the German Blitzkrieg last 2 weeks ago. I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. Air power projects. I'm passing around a sign-up sheet next week for topics. Put a little blurb in the syllabus about it, but 1-page talking paper for the format in the tongue and quill. Basically, a talking paper is an outline. So it's designed to help you talk to a topic. It's a crazy name. But tongue and quill is available on thehomecenter.com. You can see the specific formatting on that. But those aren't due until right before Thanksgiving. But the complement to that, the idea is you have one topic, you write a 1-page talking paper about it, and then you talk about that topic in a formal presentation for 3 to 5 minutes. Formal briefing for the ROTC cadets in here who kind of learned about that before. 250s, we kind of go over that. We'll actually go over the 100 class here coming up before you have to briefing. So, but 3 to 5 minutes. Try to hit that target. There's quite a few people in the class, so it'll take us 2 weeks to get through the briefings as is. As far as your topics go, it can be kind of anything we've covered in this class that you want to study in more detail. What I'm trying to avoid by having a sign up is, 18 of you talking about, the B-17 Flying Fortress or the P-51 Mustang, which we're going to talk a little bit about today. So I just kind of want to hear some different topics because everybody's going to be bored if everybody's talking about the same thing. Yes.
So we're signing up on the 29th.
Yes, next week. And if I have issues with the topics, it's not like a graded thing. I'll just say, hey, I don't want you to do that topic. We'll just have you pick a new one. Big things, that some people have done in the past, specific aircraft, specific battles, historical figures, Air Force leaders. And it can be anything from kind of the start of the semester all the way up until the end of the semester. We're going to get through Korea by the end of the semester. So if you want to kind of read ahead, I know, crazy thought, but read ahead a little bit and see if there's a topic that piques your interest. Only ones I'm kind of putting a kibosh on now. We talked a lot about Billy Mitchell already. So Billy Mitchell will let his legacy just carry on as is. Any questions? If you have any questions about topics, you can shoot me an email or stop by. Yes.
Can or should we do like PowerPoint and visual?
Yes. So PowerPoint's good. Just kind of a title slide, overview slide. Just here's what I'm talking about, kind of like we do, and then just kind of slide for each of your main points. So pictures always help too. Any other questions? Good questions. Alrighty. Cool. So we'll just pass it around next week, and you can all sign up. We'll just pass it around during class. I'm okay if there's maybe like one repetitive topic, but much more than that, it's no fun for anybody. Okay. So last week we talked about the Blitzkrieg, kind of how Germany started taking over in Europe. What else was going on just worldwide, and even just maybe outside of Germany attacking Poland, France,
Japan was invading China and going on like a pillaging, like, frenzy all over the countryside.
Okay. Religion frenzy.
I like that whole area, the whole Pacific area.
Okay. Where else in the Pacific? The Philippines. Okay. Philippines. Which at the time was a commonwealth of the United States. Acquiesced during Spanish-American War. Okay. What else?
Great Depression going on still in the U.S.
Okay. Very good. Kind of helps set the framework, kind of why maybe in the 1930s we weren't jumping on the chance to get involved in another war. Okay. All right. Well, we'll talk a little bit in more depth here. But obviously, relations between the United States and Germany were poor kind of during this time. You know, France kind of informal ally of ours, as well as just anybody who's kind of taken over half of the free world. We're not going to be big fans of at that time in history. We were supporting Britain in its war with Germany, sending war material, as well as to the Soviet Union. And Germany had attacked the Soviet Union in June of 1941. So, just about 6 months before they declared war on us. And that was kind of in violation of a non-aggression pact between the Soviet Union and the Germans. It's kind of always an unstable peace. I think both sides were kind of just trying to buy time with that agreement. They're kind of similar to rewinding the clock back to World War I. There was undeclared warfare in the Atlantic Ocean between U.S. convoys delivering supplies to Britain and German U-boats. And in October 1931, the U.S. destroyer Reuben James was sunk as well. Meanwhile, while kind of those relations are not so good, looking east from the United States, looking either farther east or west, whichever way you want to look at it, relations with Japan were deteriorating as well. Probably mentioned the Japanese invasion of Manchuria, part of China in 1937. Just awful atrocities kind of going on, slaying hundreds of thousands of people. Kind of at the same time, Japan kind of kept beefing up their military as well as their economic base in China, or in Asia overall. So kind of seeking more natural resources. And as a result of some of this expansion in the Far East, President Roosevelt froze Japanese assets in the United States, so all kind of financial assets, and halted all trade with Japan in July of 1941. This kind of was in direct response to Japanese invasion of Indochina. So anybody know where Indochina is now? What territory that is?
Malaysia?
No, not exactly.
Cambodia?
Yep, Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, kind of that part of the world. And kind of at the same time we were freezing assets, General MacArthur, who later became the guy in charge of the War of the Pacific, and would lead us in the first chunk of the Korean War. He was named the U.S. Forces Philippine commander, and the U.S. actually kind of nationalized the Philippine Army at that time. Japan sent some envoys to the United States trying to negotiate an end to the trade embargo. Those failed. The talks deadlocked. And then the Japanese basically started their fleet sailing for Pearl Harbor that summer. And of course, Japan attacked the U.S. Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor December 7th, 1941, a day of infamy, where over 2,400 U.S. personnel were killed. The Pacific Fleet, minus our aircraft carriers, were destroyed because they were out for training at the time. U.S., last time we actually declared war was December 8th, 1941. We declared war on Japan. Anybody know how we got at war with Italy and Germany?
Didn't Hitler, like, a little afterwards, declare war on us, and then Italy's like, alright.
Exactly. So it was literally the day after Pearl Harbor, Germany declared war on us, and I believe Italy was pretty much just did whatever Germany was doing. You know, and it's kind of crazy because they could have easily kind of kept things going, fighting the British and the Soviets in Europe, but they declared war on us. So we're like, all right, we'll play your game, Germany and Italy. So a couple days later, we declared war on both Germany and Italy on the 11th of December. So, the American strategy for war. Like I said, we kind of had all these war plans shelved. Air Corps Tactical School, but military strategists, policymakers, people knew that there was a good chance we were going to get into World War II. So they had a couple plans on the shelf. The Air Corps Tactical School put out Air War Plans Division Plan 4 1 week after Pearl Harbor, and these were kind of the three priorities for the Army Air Force. So the first priority was going to be the safeguarding of basically a defensive posture to safeguard Britain and the U.S. So kind of both homelands there. The second defense priority was to fight a decisive air offensive against the Axis powers in Europe while containing the Japanese aggression in the Pacific. Forces would invade the European continent when and if it became necessary. And then the third priority was a sustained air offensive against Japan and the use of land forces when and if necessary after the defeat of the Axis powers in Europe. So a lot of this had come out of a pre-war kind of gentleman's agreement between Churchill and Franklin FDR. Basically, it was kind of thought that Germany was the bigger threat, where Britain and Soviet Union kind of had a bigger threat of being overrun. It's a lot easier to contain the Japanese in the Pacific. So priority 1 plus priority 2 plus priority 3 in Roman numerals equals 6, or VI, CTORLY. On the slide, it just spelled out victory, but I capitalized the I. That was my major contribution to this slide. Okay, so kind of the first major theater we kind of got involved in with active combat would be the North Africa theater. Kind of the thought process of North Africa. In a sense, it was kind of easing our way into the war. Remember, at this time we were kind of still building up the military. We kind of come off of the interwar years. We had kind of by late 30s started building up a little bit, but not on such a scale to wage a two-front war in the Pacific and in the Atlantic. So an invasion of the European continent in early 1942 was thought to be too much to expect out of the Americans. Also, we had staging grounds in Egypt to invade Libya, which the Axis powers were holding. Additionally, kind of thought process behind North Africa. For years, the Soviet Union had been kind of asking for a second front of the war. Just in a sense, kind of appease them. Hey, we opened up another front, trying to pull German forces away from that bloody Eastern Front. So North Africa was the first use of ground troops, U.S. ground troops against the Germans, and it provided valuable combat experience for both ground and air forces. It also provided a chance for the United States and British forces to fight a combined arms campaign together. Who's seen Patton? Okay, handful of you. So Patton actually does a really good job kind of following the war in North Africa up to the invasion of Italy, and then kind of changing gears to the invasion. So if you haven't seen that movie, really, really recommend it. It was on Netflix. I don't know if it still is.
What's it called?
Patton.
That's your mostly not like him at all.
I didn't know the guy, but he got stuff done. You know, he was kind of brash. You've seen the movie?
Yes.
You've heard the stories. You know how he slapped around the soldier who had kind of what nowadays would be considered PTSD. So yeah, that's probably a little brash. But kind of funny how he very much toted the line of the Allies. When he referred to the Allies, it was always fine. The British and us. He kind of excluded. In a way, it kind of I don't know. It was kind of to me it was almost like foreshadowing what the Soviets were going to do the next enemy. But maybe that's just partially his fault too that he alienated them. Kind of depending how you look at it. What do you think, Kennedy? You like that?
I like him. He's like the idea he was kind of a jerk on the battlefield, like just like let people go and fight, like regardless he didn't really care. But he was for the most part on the front lines. Like he was almost killed multiple times. So I mean, people think he was like sitting there and would go there, he just happened to win all the time. So that's like
the only thing I didn't like, and I mean I think this might have been a little over dramatized in the movie, was kind of the butting of heads in Montgomery on the British side. I think that may have led to a little ineffectiveness of the greater ally. So just one man's opinion. And North Africa would become the first defeat for the German ground forces since the Nazis took power in the 1930s. Eventually, they fled with their remaining forces back up into Italy and the main European continent. And the campaign took the strategic initiative away from the Nazis. So basically, they'd kind of gone from an all-out offensive war, continuing to conquer more and more land, to basically kind of after the defeat in North Africa, they were basically retreating slowly for the rest of the war. So, as far as the air campaign went, North Africa kind of was a series of growing pains for us. The air campaign in North Africa was not as significant as we'll talk about with the rest of the European theater. But we did learn in North Africa how to employ air power in tactical situations. So kind of talking tactically, that's kind of more of that close air support, air superiority kind of within a region, rather than talk strategic air power. We're talking bombing factories, or civilian centers, things like that to kind of crush the enemy's either will to fight or their ability to wait for. Remember, tactical is kind of more at the individual battle level. We experienced many problems initially, so it's kind of like, we talked about all these lessons learned out of World War I. It's kind of like somebody forgot to open the lessons learned book up when we started the North Africa campaign. Because initially air units were split up among ground units, and they were directed by ground commanders who decided what missions would be flown. So that's kind of how they split up the different squadrons of aircraft. You're going to support that ground commander kind of in that area of responsibility, and this squadron is going to support over here. And typically those ground commanders did not share their resources, their aircraft, their airmen. Additionally, we did not take to the offensive much with air power in North Africa. It was used more defensively as an air umbrella, kind of creating like a bubble over Allied forces. Pretty minimal close air support, interdiction, or air superiority. So because of this, splitting it up with a bunch of different ground commanders, not sharing it, it was inflexible and allowed the Luftwaffe to concentrate and fight where it wanted. In a sense, we've given up the initiative early on. But we did. We went back to the drawing board in the summer of 1942. Both us and the British. We made a couple of key changes. So the command of air forces, different squadrons, groups, they went to air officers. So kind of just like talked about in the 100 class, you know, who typically will command a flying squadron. A fighter squadron, fighter aircraft squadron.
Brigadier General?
No, not rank. Just what kind of person? What was their job in the military? Okay, so yeah, a fighter pilot or a fighter combat systems officer will command those squadrons. Who's going to command in today's Air Force a maintenance squadron? So, maintenance officer. So you want the most specialized people commanding these squadrons. So that's exactly what we did in 1942. Additionally, command posts were co-located with the senior ground commander. So, you know, whether that was a colonel or a brigadier general or a lieutenant general, they basically sat in the same office to help make decisions together underneath the overall commander. And thus, the air officers thus determined the missions and allocated forces for missions. And we stopped using the air umbrellas, so we kind of stopped that defensive posture and went to a more offensive posture. Furthermore, in early 1943, the Allied Air Forces were further reorganized and combined to reflect the various missions and capabilities of the forces. Aircraft were combined by mission instead of nationality, so we kind of broke down the nationality barriers of us, the British, combined, you know, fighter units together, bomber units together, and put together strike packages as necessary. So different designations were bombing missions, fighter missions to attain air superiority, and tactical missions for ground support or attack. So kind of the result of all this reorganization in 1942, 1943, the flexibility of Allied air power had been restored, and air operations became totally offensive in nature. And we achieved air superiority, so basically freedom of the skies again, through an air war of attrition. So we took out more of their aircraft than ours, eventually crippling them. So kind of all these lessons learned in North Africa, we would take them forward going into mainland Europe. And by May of 1943, we were victorious in North Africa. We took those lessons learned primarily initially up to Sicily and Italy. That's kind of where we went next before preparing for the cross-channel invasion of Normandy. Okay, we're going to kind of switch gears now to talking more about strategic bombing in the European theater. I know it's something you've been waiting for weeks with all of our great talks of Air Force Tactical School, Air Warfare Plan 1, all that great stuff. But first, who wants to read a quote from Erwin Rommel?
Anyone who has to fight, even with the most modern weapons, against an enemy in complete command of the air, fights like a savage against modern European troops, under the same handicaps and with the same chances of success.
Very good. General Mark Welsh, the Chief of Staff, he kind of came out and put out a lot of new doctrine and vision statements for the Air Force, kind of over the past year or so. But kind of one of his big messages, I think it might have been in a couple Air Force commercials on TV. Air power, because without it, anybody remember it? You lose. Very good. Somebody was listening to that. Brings a tear to my eye, Ritzer. 2 gold stars for Ritzer. Just thinking. Yeah, we're going to skip the Benjamin O. Davis video temporarily. Get back to that. Okay, so primarily our strategic bombing campaigns against Germany ran from 1942, obviously, through the end of the war. This strategy was heavily influenced by all the studies, thoughts that were going on in the Air Corps Tactical School, and as well as other bomber advocates. So there were 2 schools of thought for how we would win the war in Europe. First one, strategic bombing, and this kind of came out of, thought processes of, what great thinkers that we talked about before the last test. Duhay, okay. Trenchard. The guy I don't want you talking about the briefings. Mitchell. Yep, very good. So, some felt that would be enough. Kind of history would show us that, either we didn't have enough bombers to do that, or, the ground invasion still was necessary. So obviously, the latter kind of became the strategy. So the basics of the U.S. bombing strategy: the United States committed to high altitude, daylight precision bombing. So while we were bombing during the day, what was happening at night? Okay, very good. So the British took to the nighttime bombing. And we talked about it in previous weeks, but the belief was held that heavy bombers, so primarily in Europe, the B-17 Flying Fortress, as well as the B-24 Liberator, flying in large formations with their defensive armament, so a bunch of 50 cal machine guns, could fight their way to targets and back without fighter escort. And the experts felt that the targets that had been outlined in AWPD-1 would be best hit in daylight. Does anybody remember any of those 4 main targets? Okay.
Marshall yards.
Okay.
Transportation hubs.
Okay.
Fuel. Synthetic fuel.
Yep. Petroleum. Very good. And then kind of the other 2 main ones, electrical power plants, as well as aircraft production facilities. All there. All bearings. We're gonna get there. Don't worry, papers. Okay. This thought process was flawed, however, because it did not take into factors such as weather conditions. So obviously, cloud cover was not good for the B-17s. Anybody know kind of how they targeted B-17s?
Didn't they just have like a window and they'd look down and like estimate where it is?
Okay. Yep. It evolved a little bit better than that, but the Bombardier had a little scope, and it kind of took into account the airspeed, and that scope helped target. But obviously, if it was cloudy, you couldn't see anything but clouds. That scope. Additionally, target obstruction was another problem. As well as fighter, opposition, and anti-aircraft artillery. So, hypothetically speaking, I think everybody thought fighters would be no match for large formations of B-17s, B-24s, but that really did nothing to take into account anti-aircraft artillery. So getting shelled from the ground. So do you think early efforts were successful or not so successful? Okay, very good. Just kind of for historical reference, the 8th Army Air Force, 8th Air Force was responsible for the strategic air war, the strategic bombing campaigns in Europe. Later in the war, the 15th Air Force bombed German targets from the south. That was after our victories in North Africa. So the first use of 8th Air Force bombing raids was using B-17s in August 1942 against marshalling yards in occupied France. Didn't sustain heavy losses, but our bombing really had no impact on the overall German war efforts. The 8th Air Force continued to mount attacks on small targets in occupied Europe in late 42 and early 43. All of these attacks had little effect. And the only plus side to it, though, was the crews were gaining battle experience and practicing different techniques. So kind of went back to the drawing board once again as our bombing raids had little effects. So a bunch of military leaders as well as civilian leaders got together at the Casablanca conference. That's what I have a picture of here. In January of 1943, it wasn't just to come up with a way forward for Allied bombing, but just kind of a good way forward, period dot, for the Allied war effort. So what do we see in this picture at Casablanca? Okay. So who's that?
Roosevelt.
Okay. Who's that?
Churchill.
Okay, no whiskey bottle in his hand.
Montgomery.
I believe so.
Nimitz.
No, Nimitz would not have been. I forgot the admiral's name. That's a guess. Who's that? Who? Hard to tell. Army Air Force officer. Arnold, very good. So Arnold was there. Top military leaders. Additionally, I don't recognize any of them in this picture, but there were two high-ranking Free French officers there. They want to hazard a guess. De Gaulle. And probably going to get second. Girard. He was another one. So Girard had been fighting in North Africa, and De Gaulle was fighting actually in mainland Europe. So kind of went through everybody who was there, who was not there. Okay, Stalin was not at this conference. Fortunately for the Soviets, they didn't get a big say in everything going on. But as far as our strategic Air Force plans went, the Casablanca established new objectives. They included the destruction and dislocation of the German military, industrial, and economic system, and undermining the morale of the German people to the point where their capacity for armed resistance is fatally weakened. Also established that the German aircraft industry would be the top priority target. And ball bearings factories, which ball bearings important for machine components, that was the complementary target. And the thought process was that air superiority would be easily achieved if the aircraft industry was crippled. So bomb the factories, destroy their ability to build new aircraft, and would achieve air superiority. Okay, coincidentally at this conference too, Allied leaders kind of were coming up for the end goal of the war. This is where we came up with the idea of unconditional surrender for both Germany and Japan. At this conference as well, it was kind of decided that for the time being, to continue that second front, now that North Africa was off the plate, this is where the decision to invade Sicily and Italy was made, as opposed to cross-channel invasion. The thought process was that would help soften pulling German troops down into Italy, would help soften both the Eastern Front for the Soviets, as well as soften France up for the Allied invasion. So the 8th Air Force slowly built up steam, gaining bombers and crews. So that was January 1943. The Casablanca Conference came up with these new plans going forward. By the spring of '43, the 8th Air Force had the ability to launch 100 bombers per mission. But against the plans, most of these attacks were directed at U-boat submarine attacks. So instead of going after the key targets we were talking about, mainly aircraft production, secondarily ball bearings factories, leadership decided to use aircraft against submarine attacks instead. That summer 1943, the 8th Air Force was ordered to bomb the ball bearings plants at Schweinfurt. And this is kind of one of our first major exposures to huge failure. So early on, our strategic bombing was unsuccessful, but it didn't cost us heavy casualties. At Schweinfurt, we did experience large casualties. For example, the attack on 1 August 1943 and did inflict some heavy damage to targets, but we lost 37 B-17s. I was going to pop quiz and say how many crew members are on the B-17, but the answer is pretty much up there. And the 10 crewmen per B-17. So 360 crewmen lost in one bombing raid on one day. Another attack about 2 months later in October of '43 resulted in the loss of 60 bombers, and another 138 came back damaged. So almost 200 were crippled or destroyed. And those lost to 60 bombers translated to 600 more crewmen lost. So huge losses. And they actually, because of these losses, they actually put a limit to the number of combat missions that crew could fly. Anybody know what that number was? 25, very good. See the Memphis Belle?
No, I know.
Okay, Memphis Belle. Okay, good. We're slowly getting to know. I'm just gonna have to start this. We've seen you Harold and Kumar or something. Yeah, exactly. Anyways, that was kind of the goal they set out there for these crews was after 25 missions you got to go home. It took a long time for any crew to kind of finally get there. Obviously, it was kind of 1943 before we were really beefing up our bombing against Europe, which is huge losses. The Memphis Belle was actually the first aircraft to accomplish that. I got a picture of me by a reproduction. I forgot it.
Yeah, in Memphis, they used to have it like downtown, and then they moved it to someplace like just outside the city of Memphis. Cause like we went there, and my dad, like his huge thing was like, oh, we should go see this while we're here. And then they're like, oh, psych, we moved it, so we couldn't get out there.
Yeah, the movie was made in the early '90s. So some old name actor, Sean Astin, the guy who played Ruby, he was in it. It's an okay movie. Okay, so huge losses. Just in those 2 days there alone, we talked about over 100 bombers, roughly 100 bombers lost. The 8th Air Force decided they had to regroup. The losses were too high. The biggest reason was the lack of long-range fighter escorts. Because primarily the two fighters we had been using in Europe at that time. Anybody know what aircraft that is?
P-38.
Okay, P-38. That's P-40. Sorry, that's the P-47.
P-51C.
Yeah, in the middle it's P-51. I didn't know it was a C. That's good.
Yeah, because the D got the double credit.
Okay. Write it down. You don't need to know that for the notes. But primarily the P-38 and the P-47 were the aircraft fighter aircraft being used. They did not have the internal or external fuel storage at the time to escort all the way into targets in Germany and make it back. So basically, the bombers were flying naked the last couple hundred miles, going into the targets and out. And then kind of looking at further lessons learned, attacks on the ball bearings factories and aircraft industry were difficult since the targets were dispersed across various different sites. In hindsight, bombing aircraft engine plants would have been a better target. And just kind of some more, I guess you'd say, failed missions. In the aftermath of the Schweinfurt factories, the Army Air Force tried changing tactics to daring low-level daylight raids on the oil fields at Ploesti in Romania in August 1943. These attacks were carried out by the B-24 Liberators, flying from both North Africa and England. And on this one raid, on this one day, out of 178 bombers launched, 90 were lost. The target suffered some temporarily heavy damage that was later repaired. But again, losing basically half of our force was an intolerable casualty rate. Basically, we put all these targets deep in enemy territory, off limits for the rest of 1943, while we came up with our long-range fighters as well as our new tactics. So for the rest of 1943, the 8th Air Force doubled in size. We resumed bombing in 1944. You see up there, December 1943, P-51s came online, kind of the best fighters we had at this point in time, as well as the P-47s were fitted with external fuel tanks. So this gave us the range to strike targets deep in Germany with fighter escort the whole way. And as a result, the Germans sustained aircraft losses, and kind of the biggest effect of that was not only were they losing aircraft, but they were losing their edge because they were losing experienced pilots, which was one of the kind of the big edges they had on us going into the war. Remember, their pilots basically had been at war since roughly 1937. Well, that's a good spot to stop for today. We'll talk more next week. Finish up Europe. Just got a few more things, key points to hit, as well as talk about the war in the Pacific. Any questions? All right. Have a good week.